A couple weeks ago, a good friend of mine and a well-known Yu-Gi YouTuber came out with his own piece of clothing for his fans to wear, and I thought, I'm a fan of his channel, I should buy his shirt. And today, it finally came, so give me 1 second. Man, I just kind of realized that you can't even really see this, but I bought a good old CMO's shirt. There it is, all 8 O's right on there. I always make fun of CMO's fans because they can remember that. I guess it's more of a roast of my own fans, that everyone can remember that CMO has 8 O's in his name. Shout out to the most annoying dog I've ever heard. But no one can quite remember that I have 2 F's in my name. That's a spoiler alert. It's true, there's 2 F's in Dzeeff. Anyway, in today's video, now that I've sort of done that way too long introduction, I wanted to talk about how to read Yu-Gi-Oh cards, because I get comments on statuses that I post in the community tab area, and I ask people, what do you want me to make a video about? And pretty much every single time I do that, one of the top comments is, I need help reading cards. And that makes sense, because even though Yu-Gi-Oh has gotten easier to read with the introduction of problem-solving card text about 5 years ago now, I guess a little bit longer than that, but even though that makes it easier to read, if you don't actually understand how problem-solving card text works, it can still be pretty challenging. So I'm going to use a couple of common examples to sort of explain the basics of problem-solving card text. And today's video will mostly focus on activation requirements and costs and effects. That's 3 really important components of pretty much any card out there, so let's jump right in. The first card that I want to talk about is Twin Twisters, and this is one that doesn't necessarily have an activation requirement, it just has a cost and an effect. I probably should close the window 1 second. When people ask me why I don't have a dog, it's literally just because of barking. Anyway, on Twin Twisters, we can see that everything before the semicolon is going to be the cost, and that really stays true for every single card out there. So on Twin Twister, the cost, everything you need to do before you resolve the effect, is you need to discard 1 card, and also you need to target up to 2 spell and trap cards on the field. At that point, once you've done those 2 things, which happen at the exact same time, now your opponent or yourself has a chance to respond to that activation. The card has not yet resolved, and that's really important, because what that means is that you have to select both back row. You have to discard a card before your opponent has to chain any of their back row. I have seen way too often you'll have like 3 back row and their opponent will activate Twin Twisters, and before they even do anything with the targeting, the person with the back row just chains one of them immediately. You don't have to do that. You can wait until your opponent actually targets them. Make sure you read cards and see what happens before the semicolon to see when you can actually respond to things. Because Twin Twisters, if it didn't target, would be absolutely insane. But because it targets before it resolves, that means that you have a chance to respond with the cards that your opponent is trying to destroy. So after all of that happens, if you want to respond to Twin Twisters, you can. Otherwise, then it goes to the after the semicolon part, which is just destroy them. Now that's a pretty big deal for a lot of reasons that I just explained, but how else does this affect things? Well, one area that I think that it actually affects is with the Paleozoic. So I have up here Paleozoic Olenoids, and what Olenoid says, we're mainly focusing on the summoning requirement of this card, is that it says once per chain, when a trap card is activated while this card is in your graveyard, special summon this card as a normal monster. Now, this is the other end of the spectrum. This card doesn't have a cost, it doesn't have a semicolon, but the colon and everything before it, that is the activation requirement. And that's different, because with the cost, you have to be able to pay that, and you have to do that before you even attempt to resolve the effect. But with the activation requirement, you can't even do this thing until that specific thing happens. So in the case of any Paleozoic monster, you can't just attempt to special summon it until the activation requirement of a trap card being activated actually happens. And in this case, what this means, and I think that of all the ruling mistakes that I see very often, especially as someone like myself, every single new player that I've played against that's been playing Paleozoic Frogs has pretty much messed this up. So listen closely. When you activate a Paleozoic card, it does not immediately special summon itself. It happens when the chain is resolving. This is so important. It's so easy once you figure out problem-solving card text, but it's something that I see almost every single new player mess up. This is important because it means when you activate a Paleozoic monster's effect in the graveyard, both players have a chance to respond to that effect before the monster is actually summoned. I don't know how many times I've seen that messed up. There's so many times I've activated a trap card and then my opponent says, oh, I'm chaining my Paleozoic, and then they just put it on the field immediately. That's not how it works at all. You have to wait until both players have confirmed there's no further responses to the activation requirement, and then when the chain resolving backwards, then you can summon your Paleozoic monster. So really pay attention which part is the cost, which part is the activation requirement, which part is the effect, and it will always go in the order of everything before this colon, and then the semicolon, and then the effect after that. Now, we've looked at a card like Twin Twisters that just has a cost. We've looked at a card like Paleozoics, which only have an activation requirement. Let's take a look at a card that has all three. So a card that I've really been playing a lot of right now, because I've been playing a lot of Duel Links with Spellbooks, is Spellbook of the Master. And this is a card that not only has a cost, but also has an activation requirement, which is really cool. So then we can see how everything works when it's all on one sort of card. So the activation requirement, the thing that you have to meet before you even attempt to use Spellbook of the Master, is you have to control a spellcaster type monster. That's before the colon, so you can't even do anything with this card. You can't attempt to activate this card unless you meet that requirement. If you meet that requirement, you can activate Spellbook of the Master, and you can activate it then by doing the cost. So the cost of this card then is you can reveal one other Spellbook card in your hand, then target one Spellbook normal spell card in your graveyard except Spellbook of the Master. That's all before the semicolon. So before your opponent has any chance to respond to anything, you not only have to meet the activation requirement, you have to have a spellcaster, but then you have to pay the cost, which is revealing a spellbook card in your hand, and then targeting a normal spell in your normal spellbook card in your graveyard. After you do all that, then both players have a chance to respond to it. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because if you activate Spellbook of Master and you haven't revealed a spellbook or target anything, and your opponent attempts to change something, you have to tell them to stop and wait a second. You have to make all your targets, and this matters because maybe your opponent has a way to deal with your spellcaster monster, so you want to you're trying to play around that somehow. But if you target like an Eternity and then your opponent suddenly changed something to put all your banish spellbooks back into your deck for some reason, now you still have to add that Eternity because you activated that or you selected that target as part of that cost. The other important thing here is that in the case of activation requirements, it doesn't matter if the card is still on the field as long as the card's effect, like the effect portion of the thing, which in the case of Spellbook of Master is this card's effect becomes that target's effect, you don't activate once per turn. As long as that portion of the effect does not say anywhere on the card like, oh, you have to still control the spellcaster monster to resolve this card, that means that as long as there was a spellcaster monster that was face up when you activated Spellbook of the Master, it'll still resolve. If you activate this card and your opponent like Book of Moons, your spellcaster monster, it doesn't stop resolving. You've already met the activation requirement. In the case of like the Paleozoics, if you activate a trap card and then you chain a Paleozoic, even if the trap card is somehow destroyed or set face down again, a trap card was still activated, so you get the chance to summon the Paleozoic. And that's really important as well. I saw way too often in my Duel Links gameplay where I had Spellbook of Fate or Spellbook of the Master, two cards that require you to have a spellcaster monster, I would activate them and then my opponent would try to like enemy controller to steal my spellcaster monster, thinking that my card wouldn't resolve. But as long as the activation requirement was met when the card was activated, it's always going to resolve as long as you meet like the cost and the rest of those types of things. So what have we learned today? Well, we've learned that before anyone has a chance to do anything, whenever you activate a card, you have to meet the activation requirements and then pay the cost, and then both players can say, okay, do I want to respond to this or do I not want to respond to it? You have to do both of those things every single time you activate a card before you resolve the effect at all, and also make sure that you're not just resolving the effect immediately if there's like chains in the chain link. That really happens in the Paleozoic mirror matches. A lot of people have a lot of different trap cards going on, a lot of different effects going on. You have to resolve the chain backwards and really take a moment and just resolve each effect in the opposite order of how they were activated, and don't really just when you activate a card resolve the activation requirement, the cost, the effect all like immediately. Just slow down and actually just resolve the chain the way you're supposed to. Hopefully this discussion helped you guys out. Hopefully it taught you something about problem solving card text. I am not perfect at problem solving card text. There are some situations where I'm not really sure what I need to do with the card, so I go and have to check up on like how problem solving card text works. But when it comes to activation requirements and costs, it is really important to know those two things so you can tell the difference between them and the effect, and then you can play a lot more cards a lot better and not have so many ruling issues. But if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more or have any other questions or comments, feel free to post them in the comment section below. I will see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.